So here we are, 10 days on from the US general election, and with the presidential inauguration in just over 2 months from now. We're in that somewhat strange political hiatus period between administrations, and of course this year it's arguably stranger than usual due to the ongoing disputes over the certification of the results. But life has to go on for the business aviation sector, and so I'm joined by my colleague Kerry Lynch, who is AIN's eyes and ears inside the Washington, D.C. Beltway, and she's going to chat with us about the industry's hopes and concerns during this period of flux. So, Kerry, I think it's probably beyond both of our pay grades put together to resolve how the final stages of this election process will actually play out. But let's get down to the brass tacks as far as business aviation is concerned. First of all, what in your view are the various industry associations likely doing right now? How do they prepare for a change administration, do you think?
Well, Charlie, beyond scratching their heads trying to figure out how this whole thing is going to sort out, and I think we have a clearer sight. This is a very important time for them because there are a lot of lawmakers who are leaving Washington, but also a lot of new faces, a lot of new staff getting ready to come in. And so they have to pay very close attention to the changes, not only at the White House level and throughout the administration, because not only does the president change over, but so does the entire cabinet. But they also have to look at all the different legislators leaving and who's replacing them. And it's a huge education effort for them. It's a constant education effort because most people who come to Washington aren't necessarily aviation experts. Of course, you do have the passionate pilot or two who come, but most of them don't know what business aviation is and what general aviation is. And this is where they really earn their keep.
Among the key topics that could come up under the new government, I would imagine could include user fees. I mean, after all, because of COVID and all the spending, unplanned spending around COVID, you have to imagine that there's going to be a need to rebalance the federal budget and user fees could come into play again. Is that how you see it? Do you think that could raise on the agenda again?
Well, user fees is kind of an interesting topic. It's the one that won't go away, and you see people's opinions on it evolve over time depending on what's going on at the given period. And right now, the new administration is coming in at a time where the aviation industry has been absolutely decimated, and especially the commercial aviation side. So their budgets have all just sunk, and in response, the government gave them all a tax holiday. So not only are they not paying money into the aviation trust fund, but their operations are down. So even once that tax holiday, if you will, comes back, the operations and the revenues just won't be generating the tax revenue as it did in past. Why this matters at this time is the aviation trust fund was going to deplete. And the only reason why it didn't is because Congress put in a stopgap measure that gets them through the time being. But NACA, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, the people who represent the nation's air traffic controllers, has already stepped up and said that they want to work with the new administration on a long-term stable funding stream. And then you're going to have the airlines who feel like they already pay a disproportionate share and have far less ability to do it. And then if you're going to have to deal with how to keep the trust fund solvent. So all of that could collide to raise the specter of user fees. Now, it just depends on how it shakes out, because when President-elect Biden was Vice President Biden, he first came in with Obama, they had unrolled a whole user fee schedule. Mm-hmm. Over the years, that changed, and then it kind of flipped, and the Democrats were very strongly against user fees, and it was kind of a Republican idea. So whether Biden will stick to the latter part of that term or favor the earlier part of the term, it's unknown. But I do know it's an issue. The long-term solvency of the trust fund will become an issue, and I do think Washington will have to debate this out once again.
Yeah, so there have to be some pretty honest conversations about, who's going to be picking up the tab. And of course, the tab, as you say, has gotten a lot bigger with the revenue going down. Well, so what might that mean to say the priorities of the Federal Aviation Administration? They obviously have long-term plans and medium-term plans, but how do you think this shifting environment might affect their priorities?
Well, I don't think their priorities are going to shift dramatically, simply because FAA over time has been a very nonpartisan agency. You will see some priorities shift. Maybe there's more grant and research and focus in the environment. And maybe there's some more dramatic changes in the front of safety, because I know the Democrats in the House, at least, have really come at that hard in the wake of the Boeing accidents. But I do know that the one thing that changed after years was their relationship with their employees. And I know that under the Republican administrations in the 2000s, that relationship had corroded quite a bit, particularly with the controllers union. So when Biden was elected, NACA was one of the few aviation associations that actually came out with a statement, because everyone else is kind of waiting on the sidelines for all these last legal battles to sort out. But they came in and talked about how, beginning with the Obama administration, and it has carried through to the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. It's not just a Democrat issue, but how that relationship began to repair. And so their statement came out and said, we look forward to building on that. And so I think you will see a government much more favorable to working towards the unions of FAA, and maybe you'll see some increased workforces. And that's something that the whole industry supports, particularly in the certification and safety areas. They want that technical expertise built up.
The other change I'm picking up on in this prospective new administration is a growing emphasis on environmental action. I think it's fair to say that President-elect Biden has made it clear that he views reducing carbon emissions as a serious issue that the United States has to confront. I believe he's planning to take the country back into the Paris Agreement on climate change action. Does the business aviation sector perhaps expect some movement there in terms of what expectations may be for reducing the carbon footprint of the sector?
Absolutely. And it comes at a time that the business aviation has long been preparing for it, to be honest. Yes, Biden is a very strong proponent of clean energy, which is very important for the industry, because there is, Charlie, as you know, billions being poured into research into clean energy. Yeah. So that kind of support could forward those initiatives. But also there is a realization that there will be a much bigger push towards lower emissions. And how that plays out really is going to depend on how the election's finalized. And not to get too in the woods, we have the Democrats holding the White House and the House, but by a razor-thin margin. But the Senate is still up in air. And right now, the Republicans have at least half the Senate, and there are two races that'll settle it. So how far these initiatives will go may depend on the outcome of two runoff races to control the destiny of the Senate. And I was on an NATA webinar yesterday where they had a staffer from the Republican side and a staffer from the Democrat side just talk about what they thought. And they were both of the belief that the Republicans have the edge in these two runoff races. But of course, anything can happen. Yes. So if you have a situation where the Republicans regain control of the Senate, then you may see a lot more moderated legislation as far as what they're going to do for the environment. So you may not see a gas tax, for instance.
Yes.
You may not see really strong restrictions on emissions. And given the close margins, the House and the Senate may be reluctant to pass any tax increases anyways.
Yes.
But what you may see is the tool that former President Obama used and President Trump used, and that is the executive order. So you may see a lot of environmental push through executive order.
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing I think has maybe moved on since, say, 4 years ago is that increasingly the business aviation sector, to some degree at least, sees environmental action now as a business opportunity, not just some sort of nasty threat that they'd rather just went away. I mean, I get the impression some in the industry think, well, society is now demanding action on this, so we might as well get behind it and turn this into a positive thing rather than just something that we try and push away and avoid conversations on. Is that how you'd see it?
Absolutely, Charlie, and I'm glad you brought that up because as I opened up with it, but I never expanded on, the industry has been preparing for this for many, many years. And, they've set tangible goals as far as limiting carbon emissions, near term and long term, and they've set out a plan with multiple pillars on how they're going to get there. And research in clean energy is one way, but carbon offsetting is another. And and then there's also the tax and trade type system that they're looking at. But importantly, no matter what the U.S. says, these aircraft have to operate, or most of them, not most, but many of the aircraft operate in a global environment. And so what's good for the U.S. isn't necessarily good for Europe. And they have to make sure their aircraft can be accepted everywhere. And so the business aviation industry recognizes that and has been trying to get out in front of the issue instead of being dragged along behind. And, again, SAF and, electric
Sustainable
engine.
aviation fuel, just to be clear.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, sustainable aviation fuel and all the other research is their effort to try and get out in front of the issue. And beyond the regulation standpoint, there's also the public perception issue. It was an interesting election this year because you didn't see that tar and feathering of the industry that you usually do during industry.
Good point.
It becomes a very popular whipping pole. Mm-hmm. And I think there are many reasons for that. But in Europe, business aviation, is still a lightning rod for populism. Every time Prince Harry steps on a plane, it's known globally. And you have different activist groups sitting out in front of FBOs trying to block activity to make a political statement about how much emissions one business jet could bring versus an airliner that carries hundreds of people. So it's a very important issue that regardless of who wins the House, the Senate, the White House, that the business aviation absolutely has to stay in front of.
Yeah, fair point. Now, of course, closely linked to the environmental issue, apart from carbon reduction, is noise and noise around airports. Do you see that still being quite an active issue in the United States in the coming months and years?
Well, Charlie, there is a well-known and worn-out statement that all politics is local.
Yeah.
And in the airport issue, that doesn't change. And as a matter of fact, when I was on this webinar that NATA hosted yesterday, that question was brought up. What does this mean for local airports? And the response was all politics is local. That, from the Washington standpoint, there will still be support of airports, but it depends on who your lawmaker is and how activist they are on the noise issue. There's certain lightning rod airports that remain in certain lawmakers' districts that do not fare as well because they don't get the support, where others, particularly in the rural areas, get a lot of support. And what the advice was when this issue came up from the staffers, both on the Republican and Democrat side, is just get involved, get reach out to your lawmaker, reach out to their staff. The staff do read their emails, and they are very important to the staff. So your emails weigh a lot. So if you have an airport you're trying to save, reach out, explain to them what it is, why it is, and what needs to be done.
Yeah, good point. And of course, I've heard NBAA say time and time again, you, our members, need to get out there and contact your Congress people. They can't do it all from headquarters. They need people writing and contacting, and that's a point worth remembering.
And quite frankly, in many cases, if it comes from the constituents, it carries far more weight. Yeah,
of course, because they're voters. Good to remember that. Can we regroup in a few weeks and hope that maybe by then the dust has settled somewhat in Washington, D.C., and we've got improved visibility from the cockpit in terms of what the administration is going to look like and what its priorities are going to be?
Absolutely.
Good. And for now, we'd be delighted if those of us watching us would share their own perspectives on how the new political landscape is shaping up for the industry. So please let us know what you're thinking in the comments box right below this latest AIN video. And thanks very much for watching.
Thanks for watching this AIN video. Please like, subscribe, and share it if you've enjoyed it. Also, visit AINonline.com for all the latest on the aviation industry.